All right. Welcome to another Data Hurdles. I'm Chris Detzel and
I'm Michael Burke. How you doing, Chris?
good, man. Here in Dallas, it's hot as hell. So that's, typical, I guess, of this time.
As
But
always, yeah.
as usual, we go out and my wife and I go out and our running kind of things. And it was tough this morning. I got 6 miles in though. So what have you been up to?
You know what? I have not hit the gym yet. It's on my list to do. I'm gonna see if I manage to make it there today on my goals. But yeah, doing really well. The weather here is beautiful in Massachusetts and loving the outdoors. We had a close scare. We'll introduce Shub in a moment, but Shub, for your background, I've been recently investing in chickens. This is like totally outside the data world. And we had a scare where a hawk came and we thought it took a few of our pets. That was the big scare
Interesting.
yesterday. Yeah, so we've been resetting from that.
AC,
Are we talking here?
6, 6. Yeah, nothing crazy. So,
not yet until they have little chicklings, you know. All right. We have a special guest, Shubh Sinha. Is that right? Tell me I said it right.
Close enough. Something, yeah,
Got it. And he is the CEO and founder of Integral. And we would love to get to know a little bit more about you. How about that?
yeah. Let's do it.
Let's
Yeah,
do it.
I
Well,
was, I was
tell
gonna
us
say,
about,
but you let me know. Yeah,
yeah, tell us a little bit about the company, your background, why made you decide to come up with the company and all that kind of stuff.
for sure, for sure. Yeah. So I guess just a little bit about me. I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee, but I have a lot of family in Dallas and Austin.
Oh,
So, Chris, I've been down
nice.
your way many times,
Right.
and have gained appreciation for truly how large Texas is in many ways.
Exactly.
But I most relevant to Integral is the company I was at before this. So I spent a couple of years as a software engineer and then joined this company called LiveRamp, a public tech company based out of the Bay, and moved over to San Francisco when I was working there. And LiveRamp's core tech, the best way to describe it is that it solved data fragmentation where if you're like a Kellogg cereal or like a CPG brand like that, oftentimes you have so much data stored in places that you don't own or have access to. You have to think about where you buy cereal. It's at Walmart, CVS, and all these different stores. But all Kellogg really receives is sales figures and store numbers. And it's not much of a customer journey in that way. And so what LiveRamp did was come in and partner with those retailers as well as just normal data providers that exist in the network and pretty much created nodes to all of them and create a unified layer such that Kellogg could track a customer journey at a high level from point A to point Z or no cereal to cereal and who's purchasing what and how. And the idea there is to just get a greater depth of understanding for the consumer to find out should there be more sugar-free cereals or should you deploy inventory in this way. And so trying to get that granular understanding of a consumer. And then when I showed up in 2020, my mandate was to do that, but for regulated data and especially in healthcare. As you might imagine, like a healthcare customer journey is even more fragmented than a regular customer journey where at least to get to a prescription, you go through a doctor, an insurance company, a pharmacy benefits manager, the pharmacy itself. And most healthcare journeys are not that straightforward, unfortunately. And so you have all these points in between and so anyway, TLDR, I spent a lot of time building analytic solutions to be able to make sense of that customer journey for the Pfizers and the Modernas of the world and for the pharmas of the world. And I realized very quickly that sensitive data or connecting sensitive data is very hard. And so there should be a company to automate that and make it easy. And so that's what Integral is. But just at a high level, kind of gives you a sense of the
Nice.
world in from. Yeah.
really interesting. So, I've done some work with LiveRamp in the past as a
Mhm.
data person. Obviously, they are one of the big pillars in the kind of I wouldn't call it enrichment anymore, but that's what we used to call it, right? What do you call it? Overarching journey, right? Of understanding a
Yeah.
customer journey, right? The healthcare space is so interesting to me. When you were working in this space and digging into kind of healthcare data and the sensitivity, what were some of the big pain points that these organizations are having? Is it sharing data? Is it encrypting data, sharing it securely? Give us a little bit more detail as to how does Integral solve those pain points?
Yeah, certainly. And if I had to sum it up, I would say most of the problems were around sharing data and productionizing it in a rich
Yeah.
state. And so if you think about any regular data set that is not bound to compliance, you can slice and dice, view it however you want. You can share it with whoever you want, plug it into Tableau, and you get all these like pretty nice features that help you understand what is in a data set. And it really gets you a good depth of understanding. I think to translate that to the healthcare world and just more broadly to the regulated data world, where you do have these sensitive data sets and combining certain variables can introduce a certain amount of risk that is a big no from the regulatory authorities. I think it gets a lot more complicated. And so when it comes to data sharing, what can you share such that when data is combined or it collides with any other type of data set, it's a compliant collision or a compliant aggregation? And then on the flip side, like how can you make sure that you get a lot of analytic value out of a data set without getting too granular? Because I think it's like this constant balance where historically, I think the attitude was, oh, you got to be more conservative on the compliance side, and that's going to destroy a lot of the analytic value. But I think,
Mhm.
especially at my time at LiveRamp, I realized that's not necessarily true. You can still maintain a state of richness and a state of high compliance and high privacy. And so I think that's what we set out to do. And I think it's primarily possible through technology, just given the speed at which we operate at. But yeah, I think a lot of what I saw was around the data sharing and the data utilization or the data productionization.
Really interesting. And for our viewers that don't necessarily work in the data space day to day, what is the value that a commercial entity or a hospital would get from this data? What is the pain points it's solving for them?
Yeah, I think just very fundamentally, if you think about it, a human in their day-to-day activities, especially in the medical world, a lot of our medical and healthcare outcomes are dictated not only by our medical behaviors, but also our non-medical behaviors. So if you take like the average person, the amount of beers they drink, the city they live in, the fitness regimen they have, those are all technically non-healthcare behaviors that all impact what prescriptions you have, what providers, and ultimately like what surgeries you might have, what complications from the medical side that might get introduced. And the way I think about it for myself is I want my data to be safely utilized because if there's a lot of people like me and maybe there's not a lot of people like me, I want that to be and I want a company to have that understanding so that I can get treatments catered to me at scale, or I can get personalized messaging about what to do, what not to do. And that's what I think about it is if you're a consumer, you ideally want the world tailored to you, especially when it comes to the healthcare world. And so I think that the data availability is so important. But on the flip side, also, you want your data utilized really, really securely and really safely. And so it is like maintaining that. But yeah, for those who are not in the data world, I would say that for healthcare companies, especially, it's so important to have that combinatorial or that comprehensive understanding of a person, just because they're all the factors really impact your healthcare outcomes.
That's super interesting. And why today, and I've had some experiences recently. I went in for a test. We have a patient portal in Massachusetts. The patient portal is fragmented. It only holds like certain records. Other records are on archaic systems. I ended up having to send a fax for a pre-auth on something. It was just like a hot mess. Does this data, is it mainly geared towards commercial entities, or can this actually help hospitals and other larger organizations have a more unified view of a customer or a patient?
Yeah, and definitely can relate with you on that pain. It's like you got to get to that first doctor's appointment 15 minutes early just to fill out all the same information you've gotten. And then obviously that's more of the innocent or benign waste of time. There's clearly more important scenarios where time waste is just not possible. Right. And so
And by
that's
the
why
way, when you go to the doctor, you have to go fill it out. And when you go to the doctor again in two months, same doctor, you got to fill out the same form. And I'm
yeah.
like, don't you already have this? Oh, we're just updating. I'm like, this is exactly what I did the last time.
Yeah.
Anyway, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was going to say all of this stems from this super large problem in the regulated data and healthcare space where you have data fragmentation. And I think it's, a variety of reasons where some tech is up to date. So some of the newest, I would just guess some of the newest provider offices probably have better tech than some of the ones that have been around for 30 or 40 years, which is contributory to the problem. The other part here is that there's a lot of data sharing that's recently started to pick up because especially during COVID and now with a lot of the AI boom, you have so much data being unlocked. And so not only are people sharing more data in aggregate, people's data is also being unlocked where you can take structured data or unstructured data and utilize it more effectively. And so for us, we seek to power the entire exchange where at some point in the future, as a result of integrals infrastructure that's buried deep in different companies, there should be a world where you don't have to fill out doctor's forms every single time, or at the very least for some of the bigger hospital systems, there is an interoperability layer in the back that understands Shub at hospital A in San Francisco versus Shub at hospital B in New York. It's the same Shub going to these places. I think the way to tackle that, however, is call it top down in a way where working with the entities that have the most commercial incentives to be sharing this data and creating treatments and promoting messaging. but also like in the data supply chain, so to speak, working top down. Like we're starting with the data purchasers, and eventually we'll work our way down to the data creators. So the
Yep.
hospitals, the care delivery areas, but definitely a lofty mission. So we're starting top down.
And and just so everyone else is aware, and these are leading questions a bit, but is this kind of lack of technology in the industry driven by regulation? Is it just driven by archaic infrastructure? What's caused healthcare to just be so behind everyone else in the industry?
Yeah, and I think with most healthcare explanations, it's definitely multi-pronged. And in one way, there is this kind of overall risk that is presented with any kind of tech migration. Like you've seen it in many other industries, right? Where you migrate tech and then you lose some data or whatnot, or maybe the tech goes wrong and you have some critical systems go down. I think in healthcare, the critical systems are truly critical and that they
Yeah.
deliver care and whatnot. And there is this better safe than innovative posture at times. I think that being said, on the other side of the tech readiness, there's a lot of tech that's geared towards non-legacy institutions like healthcare. And I think only in the past 10, 15 years have you seen, at least from a VC and like tech perspective, have you seen healthcare unicorns and whatnot up here? And in some ways, the software wave or the technological wave in healthcare is younger than other industries. And so I think that's also contributory. But I would definitely say that now, especially with what we're seeing, there is where there used to be a desire, now there is a necessity to keep up with the speed of the world because there's so much tech encapsulating the world where healthcare is no longer immune. And you definitely still have areas that are a bit more on the better safe, the sorry side of things. But I also think tech has become a lot more deliberate and methodical. And so there's more healthcare adoption happening because you see the equal care by which a company is engaging in with you and making sure your system doesn't go down. Or if it does, there's a quick backup in place because you can't have important machines go down or like important data infrastructure go down.
Yeah, absolutely. So these companies, you said you're starting really at the top of the funnel, right? Mostly people that are willing to pay for information. They're building these kind of unique 360 customer profiles, right, on their customers. How do they create value with that data? And since it's a Boston-based company, I'll pick Moderna as an example, but we can obfuscate it to anything you want, right? A company that, from what I know of them, primarily is manufacturing vaccines, but I'm sure that they're doing tons of other research, right? How would they use my customer 360 data to create more value?
Mhm. Yeah, and the most clear journey I saw over and over while I was at LiveRamp, and I think we intersect the most with at Integral is with the targeted messaging or
Yep.
awareness of medications. And if you're Moderna and you have a vaccine out in the market, you want to get that vaccine to people in a way that's catered to them. Not everybody has a CVS near them. Not everybody has a clinic
Yeah.
near them. And so, how do you simultaneously take into account me in New York, where I pretty much have access to most clinics, and then back before I started LiveRamp, I was living in a suburb of Tennessee where there just wasn't as much in terms of clinics and whatnot. So it's like those two consumers have to be accommodated simultaneously because it's like a Cheetos ad where you can ignore one. And so in
Yep.
that way, you have to understand both of those people at a certain 360-degree level that helps you inform decisions like ad deployment. So if you know that somebody has a particular an inclination to be on on their cell phone, like you make sure to in certain apps, you make sure to have ads in certain apps that your audience is more likely to go to. Say, hey, new vaccine available, go get in line or go register. And then that's a very specific example, but it's this idea of how do you tailor the journey to individual consumers? You have to start with a 360-degree understanding of each of them at scale. And then you have to cohort them and then you have to understand what are the unique and scalable paths to spreading awareness or to letting them know that there is this new thing out. And, vaccine, especially when COVID was surging, was so important for so many people. How do you let the older population know simultaneously while letting the immunocompromised population know? And it's all these like unique tailorings that you have to do at scale that are now possible because there's so much data to capture every part of a consumer's life.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I have so many thoughts about it, like competing in my head. I'm going to try not to get too far off on a tangent. As a company, right? Unlike many other markets and the dirty secrets, if you don't work in the data spaces, we can target anything, right? At this point, who you are, what you do, what you need. But with healthcare data, there are more restrictions, right? There's a lot less granularity. Can you walk us through kind of some of the ins and outs of what can and can't you do with healthcare data? And also maybe just talk a little bit more about how that varies from state to state, right? We have all these regulations, CPA, GDPR, if you're working in Europe. How do those impact how you handle data? Because for me, and even working with Ramp a few years ago, the complexities of that ecosystem just became overwhelming. Trying to navigate, even the laws themselves are confusing as to what they mean and how you can act by them.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting on the key point, which is there's a certain amount of reactive compliance. So HIPAA's been around for 20 years or 15 years, and
Yeah.
however long it's been around, but it also got an update last year for tracking technologies, which weren't around 20 years ago. And so you have this what I'll call like a reactive compliance solution. So most companies know what it means to be HIPAA compliant with your data and what you can target on and what you cannot. But then you have the state data privacy regulations that you just mentioned, where in the last 4 years alone, you have 23 states that have released their data privacy regs. And I think what's likely going to happen is more of those come up because I think we look more like a fragmented GDPR in the future than like a one sweep all kind of policy, in which case federal typically stacks on state and then stacks on federal, depending on where you're sourcing your data and how you're using your data. And if you think about just our previous example, like Moderna, they're not going to not use California data just because
Right.
CCPA has more restrictive covenants than HIPAA, and they're going to find the union in between HIPAA, or they're going to union HIPAA and CCPA and take into account both of them at the same time.
Right.
In which case that becomes a little bit of a proactive stance because there is no like unique combination rule, but you have to take that into account for being compliant, which I think is important, not only because you want to avoid fines as a company, but at the same time, customers want to build trust. And the only reason they share data is because they know it's used somewhat safely. And so I think there's like a real risk there to not doing that. And so to the point you were making about navigating all that, I think that is why we developed the software we did, where it's a pretty robust automation that powers data connectivity. But it's not that we went policy by policy and automate each of them. It wasn't like CCPA is Monday, Virginia is Tuesday. It was more like we spent a long time developing a product that could learn, interpret, and apply regulation to find embedded risk relative to that data set. And as new policies come out, to the point of being proactive, you're not going to be a multi-billion dollar company and launch a data set and then just say, oh, there's no compliance around here. You're going to be on the proactive side and say, I'm going to be compliant ahead of new laws, or I'm going to be compliant as new laws are being passed or as laws are already passed. And so that's where we help navigate the trenches a little bit there, as well as just also making sure to avoid the known complications.
Really interesting. Now, I know a lot of companies, and I've got a few more big questions to come, but a lot of companies, right, in this space, they build out an ecosystem, and then eventually the level two is some sort of cross connectivity, or even data store or place where you can sell and commerce data in a way that's meaningful and safe and reliable. Are things like that in your foresight? Are you looking towards the ecosystem, like going further upstream, or where's Integral heading in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, certainly. And I think for us, there is a network effects that appear. So what we notice is that if company A is an integral partner or customer and they want to share data with company B and they're not our partner and customer, there's usually a setup integration process that still happens more quickly than if you were to use the incumbent solutions of consultants, and we
Yep.
can allow them to share data. But if you have two integral companies sharing data with each other, because we have direct integrations, it happens relatively seamlessly, where there is that network effect of, okay, you're already on the network, you're already on the compliant rails. And don't think we have like a data store per se in our future there, but you can easily see
Yep.
how it acts as like a pseudo data store in a way. And so my goal is not to play matchmaker with data. Typically we come in when people already know what data sets they want, or we help
Got it.
them data set purchases that they want. And so usually there's an idea of here's what there, as opposed to them coming to Integral and saying, give me what you got thing. And so we're typically coming in when there's already an idea for exploring, and you either need a magnifying glass into the data set to find out, is this worth buying? Or you need a magnifying glass to find the embedded risk, and then have Integral propose solutions and execute those solutions and deliver the data in a timely manner, and then maintain that real time regulated data delivery throughout quarters or months or days, just because that's how quickly certain data sets change.
Really interesting. With all of this, right, in the last year, we've slapped on AI and large language models. And now it's like the rage. Everybody wants a large language model. Are you guys working with large language models? If so, how does that change the landscape?
Yeah, certainly. And from a customer perspective, we have a few LLM use cases, and I definitely noticed for us, it's the same implementation, just edited in a way that we're looking for maybe different types of risk because you have to look for bias in data sets and you have to look for certain things that a model can learn from. Whereas if you're just putting a data set in a data lake for it to be analyzed, there's a model can hallucinate, a query cannot for the most part. And so you have to worry about that if you're the company. Ideally, if you use us, you don't worry about it. But if you are the company and you're thinking about concerns and compliance risks for things to mitigate, those are things that you have to think about. And so for us in the LLM use cases, we definitely make sure to have maybe like a more comprehensive understanding of the data with regards to bias and whatnot, because you have certain executive orders that are coming out. And I think regardless of whatever happens throughout the course of the year, I think user privacy is something that people are typically aligned on. And so we
Yeah.
only see that getting tighter and tighter, especially with how models are picking up and pace and innovation, which is a fantastic thing. But a model is also only as good as the data that goes within it. And so it's kind of this like equal parts handshake. And then internally, yeah, we're definitely leveraging a lot of these innovations where for us to be able to understand more greatly in our, specifically in our R&D, where can we improve? How can we always make sure we're moving faster with regards to internal deployments and whatnot? Definitely, I think AI has catalyzed the work of what would be like an additional 5 or 6 people, but making it cost of $20 a month or whatever it is
Yeah.
to do some work. Some of our homegrown models that are on-prem, siloed off. And
It's so amazing. And we've talked to a number of data leaders over the past year on large language models and the effect on data quality. It's already hard enough if you've got a complex ecosystem inside to maintain and manage quality. How do you help ensure customers, as they're integrating in all of these third party and nth party sources, that consistency and quality is maintained?
yeah, and that's where our software, if I had to oversimplify it, it can interrogate a data set very quickly and very comprehensively. And in that world, say you have a ton of first party data and third party data, we'll start with interrogating each data set separately and even each column, each value in the data set separately. Luckily, it's a
Yep.
computer doing all this, so it's relatively quick. But then we do a combinatorial analysis of what does it look like to combine each column and what is the risk profile there. So you have this almost like this independent and this combinatorial analysis. And that is what showcases the risk in the entire data set and where the risk might be hiding in the corners that you have to analyze. And then on our end, as we're coming up with problems and servicing them to the data buyers, because they want to know where the compliance concerns are to get ahead of them. We're also generating compliant copies or compliant options such that they can have something off the shelf that's ready to go, or they're able to customize it. But the big thing that we do in all of our implementations is we make sure to gather data preferences ahead of time, because I think clients and data utility have to be treated equally. And so what we typically see is that one of our off the shelf copies typically works out just because we have that preference ahead of time. And then we do our delivery and that happens on some sort of cadence. And so for us, it is really managing that process end to end and making sure things are weighted relatively equally from a data buyer or data purchaser perspective.
Really interesting. And so, do you have your own, I would say, templates or predefined schemas that you recommend people fit to so that those transactions are better? Or do you do all of the connectivity behind the scenes?
Yeah, it's a function of both where if
Yeah.
a company wants just like quickest solution possible, we've done so many of these now, we can say, hey, if you want something that's cookie cutter, we can get that for you. But I would say 95% of our use cases fall under the custom umbrella where oftentimes the incumbent solution is a consultant. And because it takes a lot longer, like 6 to 12 weeks compared to like hours to a few days for us, custom, you see a lot of custom requests, in which case, while we do offer predefined schemas, we find that the the real part where Integral shines is balancing customization and speed.
That's great. So, looking ahead, we've talked a lot about today, and thank you for getting in the weeds with me. This is where I shine. I love to learn about new technologies and new companies,
Mhm.
as do a lot of our listeners. Where do you see Integral moving in the next 3 to 5 years? And how do you see the market landscape changing? Do you think there'll be less regulation or more standards? Where are things headed?
Yeah, yeah, and I like to call this a founding bet in a way. So like, where do we see the in 10 years?
Yeah,
And my feeling is that healthcare, financial data, they led the charge where you see more and more data being regulated now. And I think that's due to a couple reasons where, across the pond, you have GDPR that's really showcasing to the world that user privacy is A lot of people, have mixed opinions about it, but I think the emphasis is that user privacy is important, which is probably the thing that people align most on. And I think that's shining a light to the rest of the world where whether it's state data privacy laws, whether it's the bills in the House that have to do with validating user privacy at a federal level, I think there's more regulation coming. And from that perspective, like if all data is going to be regulated, I think Integral is relatively well positioned to create a regulated first data stack in a way where if you are working with sensitive healthcare data and you're looking to productionize it as soon as possible, you can use us. If you're looking to work with consumer data and combine it with other types of data and making sure you're compliant in 15 different states as well as with HIPAA, like that, I think Integral is just well suited for. And so where I see the world going is that more and more data is regulated. However, I don't think that it's going to prohibit usage. It's just going to incentivize a higher posture, higher compliance posture, privacy posture to deal with that data, which I think is going to be in the betterment of consumers as well as companies, because I think they're going to use it to build trust. And so that's how I think about the world, in which case I might be biased, but I think we're well positioned for it.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that in addition to regulation, you're going to see a lot more auditability, right? The need to be able to go back and say, how did you make this decision, right, with your model? Or how did you market to these people with this cohort? How was it formed? That explainability is just coming through in every asset of this kind of new modern data stack. Shep,
Yeah.
thank you
And
so much. This is super helpful. Sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, I was just going to say, I think that if you think about all data being regulated, you almost have your compliance stack and your data stack merging, and there
Yeah.
needs to be a link between those two. And I think Integral is the ideal link.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for your time today. This was incredibly, I would say, educational as well as just really tremendously helpful. So thank you so much for jumping on the show today. We really appreciate you joining. Don't forget to rate and review us. I'm Michael Burke.
And I'm Chris Detzel.
Thanks for tuning in.